twofold. One is coal contributions to the region have been quite significant for a long time. We have a lot of end companies. They took a big hit, and they have for a long time here. So that's been one drag on the economy. The other piece is that healthcare is becoming a larger and larger component of our regional economy. And that's an area that's really not that cyclical, which is a good thing. It also means that when things get better, that sector doesn't necessarily do as well. It's going to be driven by more demographic factors like that. Okay, so U.S. 2-something% growth. What I want to do is make a point that if you look across the country, yeah, U.S. averaged 2-something% over the long term. That's what this blue line is here. The gray standard errors here are going to show you kind of plus or minus kind of where 60% of the different metropolitan areas in the country fall in here. So there's some places in the country that have seen steady growth, 5-6% a year. There's other places in the country that have actually seen steady declines in their economy for long periods of time. So up here on the top, that's going to be San Jose, California. So 7% growth, and it's been pretty steady for a long period of time here. And then New Orleans. So economy that's really been in a recession for a very, very long time. So while these national average numbers do give us some picture of what's going on, there's a lot of variability across the country in how well a place is doing. In fact, you know, you can say that these things are worlds apart. So if I take the states here, that's the distribution of growth for states from 2011 to 2015, which is where we have kind of all common data here. And as you can see, there's a couple states, like North Dakota is going to be that far little bar over there. Again, that's thanks to our oil production and shale boom here. So North Dakota, really fast growing economy for a long period of time here. And then Louisiana on the other side, actually been in a recession even during this recovery. When you look at cities or metropolitan areas, this thing gets even wider. So again, we said San Jose, Texas, those are going to be the places out on the right, and then again Louisiana down on the far end here. If I plot this next to global growth, so I took like 185 countries here over the same period, the distribution of growth around the world is very, very similar to the growth within our own country. So just to kind of keep that in perspective, that there are places that is, even when the U.S. economy is doing well, there are places in this country that have consistently been in recessions, and places where even when the U.S. economy slows down, they're still booming. So why is that? That's the thing that I'm going to really dive into here. Well, first of all, I think if we look across the country, you know, we started with westward expansion. Well, guess what? It just continues. The West Coast just continues to grow faster than the rest of the country. We see people take from the northeastern states. People are moving out of there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And generally speaking, growth in the northeastern portion of the country and in the Midwest has been a lot slower. So you're looking at average growth, you know, almost 2.5% in the West. That's going to be the big driver of growth in the nation too, as the population bulk tends to shift over there. When we look in the region, you know, yeah, slower growth is pretty typical. Unfortunately, the St. Louis metro area even is slow for kind of this bulk of these Midwestern states. I see people peeking around, so hopefully, if you don't get a chance to look at these slides, I'm happy to share them afterwards and we'll distribute them. But yeah, St. Louis growth is definitely under 1% on average over this period of time. Nashville, I think we all know, has been booming for a long time, and then it's out as kind of the outlier. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take those GDP numbers and decompose it and explain to you why it is that one place is growing faster than the next place. And I think it has some implications for interpret the data. Okay, so if anybody took Econ 101, GDP can be broken down by consumption, investment, government spending, and exports. That's kind of the typical way to do that. I'm going to take a different approach here because it allows us to look more regionally at what's going on, which is to say GDP is a function of how many workers we have and how productive they are. That determines how much output we have. How productive we are is a function of the capital stock that we have, the technologies, and a whole bunch of other things. Workers are going to be a function of how old our population is, and people moving in, factors like that. but I think it's a pretty straightforward way to think about output for the region. So how many people we have, what's the propensity to work, and then how educated those people are is also going to tell us how productive they are, as well as kind of what the capital stock looks like in the region. So if I take this decomposition to the US data, this is the picture that I'm going to get here. We got a lot of animation, so let's start here. Okay. So first of all, population growth. So U.S. economy grew over this period 2.2%. So population growth is going to be kind of, what do we have here, about 0.8% of that. So half of the growth in the U.S. economy, or a little less than half of the growth in the economy, is just because we have more people. More people can work. Now, we are aging, so the propensity of those people to work is actually going down. So the labor force participation rate is a bit of a drag on the economy as that's declined. But not much at this point. And then the declines in the unemployment rate. So overall, kind of this cyclical factor of people finding jobs, there's better matching, more work, more businesses hiring. That's this big component that you get during these economic expansions that's not going to be kind of typical over longer periods of time. You can work more hours, right? So if people work more hours, you get more output. That's going to be a bit of an add-on here, so people are working longer hours. And then that last piece, which is the productivity part. So how productive people are is contributing about 0.5 percentage point. During the 1990s, we saw growth even faster, where this was making up about 1.5% GDP growth during these periods of time. So this is where I say, unless population grows faster and we get more people working from that standpoint, unemployment rate can't go much lower. So we need either the population component or the productivity component to pick up if we wanted to see any faster growth over a long period of time. So now when we look one step further, I just want to take this and say, okay, well, population growth is actually twofold. Nationally, there's going to be three parts when we look at the city, which is how many people are moving into the country, as well as just how many kids we're having. So you can break that down even further. And then there's this other piece that's missing for the national, which is domestic migration, which is where people are kind of sorting themselves out across the country. Okay, so this is the way I'm going to break this down, and we'll start looking at different cities. There's a couple caveats that I want to mention that are important for this. We can, you know, they kind of get into some nuanced issues, but you have to assume basically that a person's going to be the same within a metro. We just add up everybody. Their propensity to work is going to be the same on average. It doesn't matter how many their hours worked are going to be the same. It's a reasonable assumption when you average everything together, but it can cause differences across different cities. Very young and very old people work. So if we assume that the flows are about the same, that averages itself out. Nationally, though, birth rates are falling, death rates are slowly accelerating. The labor force participation rate is going to kind of capture this component, so that's kind of the way you can look at that. And then the last piece, regional data are always subject to measurement. Really quite significant revisions to some of the regional data. So sometimes we get funky numbers that just don't make any sense, and all you have to do is wait a couple of months or a year or so, and those things go away. Okay, so if I take that component, these components to St. Louis, this is what the picture looks like. So we have net birth, about 0.3% is coming from just adding people through birth. But that's more or less just dropping away with domestic migration. So we have more people leaving the area than coming in. And those two things are more or less offsetting each other to be a slight drag here. International migration makes up about 0.2% of growth. So we do have a net inflow of foreign-born workers. Labor force participation rate is taking away from growth. So again, we have an aging population relative to the U.S., even more so. So ability to find workers is even more challenging because we've got more people retiring. So unless they want to work for free and produce output, we're going to struggle there. The unemployment rate's dropped a lot, so the local economy has improved. That's been the biggest component to growth. But people are working fewer hours. This is twofold. I think the way I've kind of come to understand this is it's part people working part-time for non-economic reasons. Either they're going to school longer or they're getting closer to retirement, they're not working as much. That can be a factor here, but that hours worked has been declining. And then last but not least, productivity adds up here. So that's to kind of the 0.8%, with the big drags on growth for the region being people leaving on net, and then hours worked and labor force participation pulling away, which is, I would consider this to be a function of the aging of the workforce. So if you put them side by side, this is what the picture looks like. Again, labor market's about the same as the national. The big drivers here pulling away are going to be this migration and then this aging of our workforce relative to the national workforce. And that can kind of help explain why the region does grow much slower than the national average. And these things are hard to turn around in short periods of time. I mean, these are long-term challenges that we face in the region. And they could be exacerbated with more time. So when I look kind of across the country, I just want to start first and mention that population growth is pretty much the big reason why the West Coast is growing so much faster than the East Coast in the middle of the country. If you look in the Rocky Mountain area, almost half of the growth is coming just from the fact that they're just adding more people. So it's not that they're necessarily more productive. You're just dumping more people into the area, so these economies have to boom. Versus in the northeastern states, population growth is pretty much flat. So they're getting growth from a lot of different places, productivity being a big piece to this. So I think you can always look and say, like, well, yeah, the reason they're doing better is they're just adding more people. If you have fixed resources, that means that some of the people there could actually be worse off because they have to share more resources. So population growth isn't always a boom for everybody that's in the region. Now, this is a difficult chart to kind of capture everything. I know there's a lot of bars on here. But the piece to take is if you look up in the top corner here, that dark shaded area is going to be domestic migration. And what you can see is the reason that there's so many places that are growing fast, it's really population shifts to those places. Now, what is interesting, though, and I'll at a few different places here, you look at Miami, Washington, D.C., San Jose, San Diego, Boston, L.A., and New York. Those are all places in the country where domestic migration is negative for the most part, so people are actually leaving those cities. The reason that their population growth is fast is mostly because that's where the international migration into the country is going. So they're able to offset the people moving out of the region with new people from overseas coming in into that area and working. So those are the big offsets. And in places like Washington, D.C. and San Jose, yeah, U.S. citizens are finding the cost unbearable. They don't want to be there anymore. But foreign-born people are moving in and saying this is perfectly fine with us. And they're able to offset that and still have relatively fast population growth. So if we look at the migration piece here, going back to population again, people moving out east, or leaving the east, moving out west. You can see it again in just the migration here. When we look at the productivity component, there's one piece that we keep getting to, which is energy, right? So the energy boom in the middle of plain states is really what's driving the growth in those places, particularly places like North Dakota. That's making up over half of the growth in the plain states here, which is quite significant and positive, which is generally strong for overall well-beings. But productivity growth in kind of the far west is not really strong, which is why wage growth tends to be a bit slower than what we would hope for. Okay, so if I take this and I just want to break it down one way here and say, like, okay, well, why is it that Chicago and Indianapolis are growing faster than St. Louis? And I think there's two things that kind of show up here. One is going to be, if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, or I did the difference between the Chicago growth rates and the St. Louis growth rates, and I realize hopefully everybody can see these numbers. But there's about a 1 percentage point difference between Chicago and Indianapolis and St. Louis's growth. The reason that growth in Chicago is faster than it is in St. Louis is due to things that I find to be desirable. So it's going to be, you know, their labor force participation rate is staying up higher while ours is dropping. You know, their hours worked hasn't dropped as much as it has here, and productivity's been a bit. If we could get those kind of things turned around, to get an extra percentage point of growth from that standpoint is a really positive thing. It means that wages are going to be growing faster, incomes are going to be going up, and overall well-being could be positive. When you look at a place like Indiana, on the other hand, same growth rate as Chicago, but really what they're getting their growth from is just more people in the area. So they're actually seeing negative productivity growth overall. So this could be industry mix changing, people working, in lower wage jobs, for example, things like that can be driving it. But it's really driven by population growth. So I think, I'd rather be on that Chicago level than on the Indianapolis level, because those are really the positives that we look for overall well-being. So I always kind of break this out this way, so it kind of gives a good perspective on what to look for. And to make the point, I think we talk a lot about population, right? The region's population's been stagnant, hasn't been growing a lot. And that can be okay. If we can find for overall, to get more capital stock into the region and better paying jobs for the people that are here, and you can educate your workforce, you can kind of keep the population the same, and everybody can be better off. I don't think anybody wants traffic congestion on their way to work every single day. I mean, that's not a positive thing. So there are ways that you can kind of get this growth, maybe slow population growth that's steady and sustainable. And that's kind of the desirable outcome that we really look for when we break this down. Okay, so what does this all tell us about the outlook for the region? I'm going to use some fancy charts here, and I'll take a minute to explain it. But basically what I want to do is take these different components and then look at a whole bunch of different indicators to get an idea of where they currently are and if they tell us anything about, what the future population growth looks like or productivity growth and things like that. So what I'm going to do is use these spider charts. So I'm just going to take 1 minute to explain how these things work. In short, I'll take a bunch of different indicators, I'll normalize them so that they all kind of have the same scaling, and then I'll plot them all around the outside here. So indicator A, B, C, D, and E. If you look at indicator A, anything so we're going to be in the red area here. Peer cities are going to be more or less the cities I showed you earlier on, and then the average is going to be for the whole U.S. Anytime that those red lines are inside of that circle, that would mean that our growth rates are less positive or not as good, so to speak, as kind of a national indicator would be. And then again, same thing for indicator C, and then indicator E over here. So that's kind of how you read this chart. So you want to see the red line kind of all the way side. That would be an indication that these numbers are looking good. When the numbers are in the inside, it means we're lagging behind either national averages or peer averages here. Okay? Everybody with me? Cool. There's the spider. I thank our assistant for that one. He decided that was worth adding on here. Okay, so let's take population growth and say, well, is it possible that we can get population region, and that's what's going to boost growth in the region? And I would say that when you look at kind of a handful of indicators here, from natural change in our population just due to birth rates, that doesn't look very good. If you look at our migration numbers, those aren't positive. International migration, our share of foreign born in the region is very small, which is probably the best predictor of what foreign immigration is going to look like in the future. The only place that maybe moving a little bit closer to the national average is the number of kids that we have. So the number of kids in the region tends to be closer to the national average than, say, the average age of the population. But for the most part, every indicator that we have for the St. Louis region on population is slower than growth is slower than the national average. When you look at the workforce indicators, the one place that we do have a bright spot is this employment to population ratio. So look at the overall population, there are more people, the share of the population that's working does tend to be higher. And that's kind of consistent with some of these relatively really low unemployment rates for the region. So that is the one bright spot. But when you look at a lot of these other indicators, for example, disability rates are a lot higher than the national average is. Number of children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, these are people who are probably not going to be working. And so those numbers tend to be very high, which is why they're pushed to the inside. One place that we are on the positive is disconnected youth. So this is going to be people, or youth aged kind of 16 to 21. that are either not in school and they're not working. So that share is relatively low. So that is a positive indicator for the region. But for the most part, I mean, we're still kind of clustered in this middle. So I don't expect to see that natural population growth is going to kind of shift anytime soon. Kind of turning to the next component, productivity growth. This is where I think we do have some really positive things going on in the region. We have great schools. We have kids that are going to school and show up, teachers that show up to school. On every indicator here, we're pretty much right at the national average, and in a few places, we're actually above the national average. So this does suggest that we can get a lot of gains from productivity growth as a way to boost the region with just the same number of people. So those numbers are very positive. And then when we look at the physical capital numbers, again, transportation times are very low, so that allows us to be more productive in our commutes to work. Interstate system is great, so that's been very good. Trucking reliability index, it's not consistent with the other two indicators. I'm kind of confused as to why that number is what it is. I would expect it to be pushed out a little bit more. But I would say, generally speaking, we have great physical infrastructure in the region, particularly when it comes to highways and roads from the transportation and logistics side of things. And if you look around kind of what's happened in the St. Louis region over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, we have seen a real boom in logistics and shipping in the region, and that has been a big positive. Startup rates are relatively low overall. And patents and venture capital money really hasn't flown into this region. We see a lot of startup firms in the St. Louis area that they actually end up moving out west to attract capital, and St. Louis-based venture capital firms also go out west to find investments. So if a St. Louis venture capital firm wants to meet a St. Louis-based startup, they got to go out to California and find each other, and that's a problem for the region. But I think we're making some good progress on those. So I do think we have some really positives on our physical capital stuff, find ways to better retain these workers. The place I think where we have the greatest potential, and you kind of started this already a little bit here, is our disparity measures tend to be much, much worse than national averages. So if you look at, for example, disparities in the unemployment rate, disparities in homicides, disabilities, this is where we're ultimately going to be able to find more people to show up and work. If you can change kind of this pool of workers that we have, because it's not growing, there's not a lot of indication that it is going to grow, so we have to find the people who are disconnected from the labor force for one reason or another and figure out what we do to attract them to work. Because without that, there's just not a whole lot of opportunity to get more people into the pie here. And these things go all the way through. The one place that we do have some pretty good numbers is on education. So we have done a pretty good job of kind of getting college graduation rates and high school graduation rates up for disadvantaged populations. But pushing those people into the workforce in a lot of different ways still haven't in the way that we need to. So this is really, I think, one of the keys to longer-term growth in the region is getting this part of our population back into the labor force, at least to where it's closer to the national average numbers. Okay, so just kind of wrapping up here, some main thoughts. Overall, the pace of growth is very different from one place to the next. So yeah, San Jose growth looks more like growth than it does kind of St. Louis's growth. And that's been stable for a long period of time. So we don't have to look very far to see a place that's been growing at 7% year over year. And we actually have good data on San Jose to prove that's the case. Decomposing growth can kind of help explain what's generating growth in different places. So in Oregon and St. Louis, for example, they both are growing about 1% a year. Portland's growth is pretty much coming all from domestic migration. So you're just dumping a lot more people onto a fixed number of resources. And in St. Louis, we're seeing pretty much the opposite. So fewer people, but more gains in productivity. But the final numbers turn out about the same. So those pose completely different challenges to how to accelerate growth and how to handle the problems that are caused by it. And kind of the last piece here is going to be, this knowledge economy, the share of the workers that have a college degree. It's been positively correlated with domestic migration rates for a long time, and productivity growth. So anything that we can do to try to find ways to boost educational attainment in the region is going to ultimately boost productivity, and in the long term, maybe not turn domestic migration positive, but at least stem the flow of people leaving the region, because there'll be additional opportunities. And then, like I said before, really ability to reduce the disparities and find ways to retain youth to this region. So if anybody has kids, do everything you possibly can to get them to come back home. Offer free rent, whatever you need to do. Help them find a job, and then once they have kids, they're never going to want to leave anyways because they need the free babysitting. So do whatever you can do to really help, keep those people around the region, because that's the only way that we're actually going to see those population numbers turn around. So with that, just want to plug, all of our publications are free. Tim used a whole bunch of Fred graphs, so all of that data from the St. Louis Fed's also free. You can go onto our website, all these reports and general commentary down. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out, and we'll send this. So with that, thank you very much.
Again, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 18th, 2019 meeting of the Edwardsville Plan Commission. We'll start with the roll call.
Veronica Armudi, Matt Bradmeyer, Greg Coffey.
Here.
David Gerber,
Here.
John McDowell,
Here.
John Mullane,
Here.
Mike Pearsall, Mark Raby,
Here.
Beth Schleter, Kevin West.
Here.
Let the record show we have a quorum. In your packets that were delivered, we have the Plan Commission meeting minutes from February 20th, 2019. Any corrections, additions? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. It's approved. One item on the agenda tonight, land use case number 2019-03. Edwardsville Marketplace final plat, developer SM Properties, Edwardsville LLC, engineer Oates Associates. Have the staff report. I understand there have been just a few changes since we saw this last, so if you want to give us the high points of what looks different than when we saw it before, Emily?
Sure. So this is a map of the site. I will point out the subdivision involves Lot A, Lot B, and Lot C. When this came previously as a preliminary plat, this portion of land up here was identified as Lot C, and now Lot C was Lot D. The developers decided to move ahead with only subdividing Lot C. Utilities are already at this lot, so there's no need to extend utilities. It just makes this process a little bit faster, a little bit simpler for the developer. Aside from that, the lot line between Lot A and B is shifting slightly so that Lot B has street frontage on the road. So that's just an overview of the site. This is a utility map showing where utilities are. I know it's a little bit difficult to see. We do have sanitary sewer, water, and storm sewers at this site at Lot C. So just, again, a brief overview of the project. The zoning is currently B2, which is Commercial Business District. In total, the project encompasses 18.6 acres, and our comprehensive plan identifies this area as commercial, so the proposed subdivision is in line with our comprehensive plan. For commercial subdivisions, 4% of the total land area needs to be dedicated to green space, and that is accomplished in this plat. Switch around to the next page here. As a perimeter strip of 3 feet around B, on all sides except for the side near the parking lot. So this would be on the north side, west side, and south side of Lot C. There's going to be a 3-foot perimeter strip, which will be the green space for this site. Moving back, you'll notice on this page, this cross-hatched area is currently, well, there's currently a drainage easement over this whole site. The portion that is cross-hatched is proposed to be vacated, and the portion that is not cross-hatched will remain. Drainage will occur for this site underground. Detention, I'm sorry, will occur underground for this site. So they're accounting for stormwater detention, not only for the property as it exists now, but for any new development on the site as well. So it's a pretty straightforward final plat, just one lot with a boundary adjustment for lots A and B, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I do see that council grants for sidewalks.
Correct. Yeah, that was done at the preliminary plat stage, and that's why they won't be installed as part of this project.
And there's no adverse traffic impact?
No, traffic will, I'm going to back up a minute to the because it's a little bit easier to see. The only ingress-egress point will be along the parking lot side. No access will be given via Troy Road, so we don't expect any adverse traffic impact.
And the 4% green space is only as it pertains to Lot C. The other green spaces for A and B are not affected?
Correct.
And since this was proposed some time ago, it falls under the previous green space requirement. Commercial development, correct?
No, this our new green space ordinance was applied to this.
Okay. Any other questions? Any questions for the developer? Hearing none.
I move that the Plan Commission recommend approval of this final plat to the City Council
As presented.
as presented. Yes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the final plat as presented. Roll call, please.
Matt Bradmeyer,
Yes.
Greg Coffey,
Yes.
David Gerber,
Yes.
John McDowell,
Yes.
John Mullane,
Abstain.
Mark Raby,
Yes.
Kevin West.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Forward. Emily, any old business?
I would like to say just a quick word about our zoning code update, if I could. Gonna minimize this presentation. So I sent out an email to the Plan Commission on Friday, as well as the Historic Preservation Commission, Zoning Board, the City Council, our Zoning Advisory Group. We're having a joint workshop to kick off Phase 2 of our zoning code update. And I just want to point you to that direction on our website and remind the folks watching at home and on Facebook. If you go to the Our Community tab on the city's website, it's cityof hover over Our Community and then click on Zoning Code. We've added a lot of information related to the code update, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the page, Phase 1, which we're nearing approval of now. Phase 2 is identified here as well, so provides information on our kickoff meeting. It's going to be Wednesday, April 3rd, the second floor of the Wildy Theater from 6 to 9. It's going to be a facility workshop, loads of fun, so we hope you all can join us, and contact me with any questions.
Thank you.
What is that topic of phase 2?
So phase 2, we're gonna
Explain it a little bit, please.
Yeah, so we are gonna discuss process improvement and design guidelines. So we are gonna be digging into processes for PUDs, for all of our development applications that are working their way through the city. So we're gonna be not only talking to you as board members and to our elected officials, you find the most value in the development process, but we're going to be seeking input from residents, from developers as to where they find the most value and where they feel we need to maybe do some things differently. We want to the fact that time is money and developers are taking a risk by investing, and a process that takes a long time costs a lot of money, and we want to make sure that we're getting the most value out of our process and accommodating those things. And then design guidelines, we're going to be talking about setting standards, setting guidelines for commercial and multifamily properties citywide. So not just historic preservation. We're not going to really be getting into historic district guidelines, but this is for commercial properties citywide. Talking about what that means, what residents, what elected officials would like to see in the future.
And under new business, did you want to make an announcement about land use committee this week?
It appears that we will not have a quorum for land use committee on Thursday, so you'll be hearing from me. Those of you on land use committee will be hearing from me or Lisa tomorrow to try to reschedule that, hopefully early next week.
Okay.
Can you also give a status of the ordinance committee's
Yes.
approval or recommendation of the food truck ordinance, where that is, where it's going?
Yep, I can do that as well. So I'll back up here. A couple things that came out of the last ordinance committee meeting, which was held on March 11th. For the phase 1 of our zoning update, we looked at B1 and MU1 districts as well as definitions. So at the last ordinance committee meeting, we spent a good amount of time tackling the definitions chapter, made some really good improvements to the definitions section. We're holding that in ordinance committee along with the B1 and the MU1 text to come back in April and continue making adjustments to those sections as needed. The other thing that was considered at the March ordinance committee meeting was a food truck ordinance, and that will come before this board in April. So the April 15th Plan Commission meeting, we do have a couple of agenda items lined up. Food trucks is one of them that went through ordinance. The ordinance as is written is proposed to allow food trucks in the light manufacturing district. We realize this is the first step, but we feel that there's a need, and a more immediate need for that district with our large numbers in that area. So.
And of course, all food trucks are welcome to attend the meeting if they would.
Of course.
If they would like to.
Excellent.
Sample the wares.
Okay, any other business, questions, concerns? Hearing none, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.